across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listener comrades of the world, unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway celebrates the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Tommy, have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
0344 499 1000. That's the number to join me, George Galloway, for the mother of all talk shows, a university of the airwaves. The more things change, the more they remain the same. We've got a Maltese Prime Minister on the television. We've got an airplane hijacking. And we've got terrorists able to move at will and kill as they please, and then put out a video which everyone then broadcasts just for their edification and to glorify their sordid acts of mass murder. The Inspector Clouseaus were not confined to Berlin, but were across many countries. All that and much more on the mother of all talk shows.
Big Georgie Galloway's back on the radio!
Galloway celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio.
Well, the mass murderer Anis Amri is dead, and dead men telling no tales. We shall probably never know what it was that, and when it was, that this petty thief, drug dealer, alcoholic, and all-round sinner, a man who lived his short life, almost all of it, in absolute contravention of anything and everything Islamic, became a quote-unquote soldier of the so-called Islamic State. He is the latest in a long line of sordid petty criminals, pimps, strip club owners, bar owners, smokers, drinkers, drug takers, who have metamorphosed miraculously, overnight almost, to become suicide bombers and killers who are determined to slay as many quote-unquote pig-eaters, unquote, as they can. It has been a melancholy story. Started out on Monday with a mass murder of 12 people and the maiming of scores of others, but for the heroism of the Polish truck driver who appears to have fought with his last breaths against the killer Amri and was killed himself in the process. It could have been far many more dead. And then Amri, helpfully or otherwise, left his ID papers in the car. All the more remarkable, not just that those ID papers were not found for almost 20 hours, during which an entirely innocent man was arrested and held on suspicion of being a Muslim with a brown face and a Pakistani accent. And during that time, the mass murderer, now with no papers, crossed, amazingly, from Germany into France, to Paris, and then onto a train to Turin, and then by some other means from Turin to Milan. He was asked by two very brave police officers, one of them a rookie, only a few months in the job, to show his identification, which he couldn't, of course, because he'd left it in the footwell of the weapon, which he had turned a truck with 20 tons of steel in it in the footwell of that vehicle. But he did have a gun, and he did shoot one of the police officers, and the least experienced of the two officers shot him dead. Of course, that's the least that should have happened to this killer, but it brings to an unsatisfactory end a very dismal story, a story of total failure, of intelligence, of policing, and of politics, and we'll be discussing all of those in the course of the show this evening. 0344, that's 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call if you have a point of view on all of this. You can also tweet me, of course, at George Galloway, us at Talk Radio, preferably both, and you have a reasonable chance this evening of getting your point of view broadcast, not just to the nation, but far beyond it. We'll be looking at the plan which is reported in The Guardian this morning, whereby Labour MPs intend to, quote, isolate, unquote, themselves from Jeremy Corbyn, their own leader, elected twice in a year by a landslide. But we've got Labour MPs who want to isolate themselves as part of a, quote-unquote, lifeboat strategy. Well, listen up, my former colleagues. I know a way that you can isolate yourself from Jeremy Corbyn completely. I know a way that you can make your own lifeboat and see if it sails or sinks. You can resign as Labour candidates, and you can stand in your constituency as John or Jane Doe, an independent, on your own merits, on your own policies, on your own strategies. Why don't you do that, you miserable cowards? Why don't you, if you think your leader is so bad you have to isolate yourself from him and find a lifeboat in your own independence, why don't you become independents? I know why. Because you are miserable, rancid cowards who care nothing about any cause more than the cause of keeping yourself in Parliament. If I was Jeremy Corbyn, I'd be collecting the names of those who intend to isolate themselves, and I'd be conveying that information to their constituency Labour parties, who will presumably be asked to deliver the leaflets, knock on the doors, ferry the voters to the polling stations in order to re-elect these miserable, rancid cowards. And I'd ask the constituency Labour parties to consider, in the absence of a principled resignation, of course, of which I can tell you there's 100% certainty of that absence, in the absence of a principled resignation, maybe you ought to pick another candidate, one who doesn't want to isolate himself or herself from the Labour Party's leader, elected in a landslide by hundreds of thousands of the members of your own party. We'll be talking to Bobby Friedman, fair to say, a critic of Jeremy Corbyn, about that strategy, and later we'll be talking to Alex Nuns, author of one of the very best books of 2015-16. It's called The Candidate, updated to deal with the re-election of Jeremy Corbyn. And in the third hour, we have the fine young cannibal himself, Roland Lee Gift, back on the road, back on tour, and with a new live album in store for us in 2017. And we'll be talking about the extraordinary habit, I referred to it last night, of the President-elect of the United States to run off at the mouth, metaphorically, on Twitter. Really, 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 somebody has to take his telephone away, because his latest outpouring on Twitter is to threaten an arms race which will beggar the world, in which he says America will outlast everybody. That's unlikely, actually, given the state of the United States economy, but it's extremely dangerous. As we discussed last night, the world already has thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, 7,500 thermonuclear warheads already. Why anyone should imagine that the United States, which spends more on weapons of war and carrying out actual war than 7 of the next biggest spenders on war put together, should possibly be in want of another massive infusion of nuclear firepower. To do what exactly? Are they going to use it? Who's going to be afraid of it? China ain't afraid of you, trumpeter. Russia ain't afraid of you, trumpeter. So what are you going to do? Launch your nuclear weapons at people who don't have any nuclear weapons? Well, that would be an achievement, wouldn't it? The truth is, the United States will not be made safer by this belligerent, ignorant, childlike, intellectually dwarfish President Donald Trump. It will not be made any safer by his rhetoric. It will not be made any more united by his divisiveness. It will not prosper economically if it is being beggared in another nuclear arms race. Now, some people said, it was said last night by a very distinguished historian and ex-military officer on my show, that this was a response to Putin. But Trump kept telling us through the election that he was on good terms, or wanted to be, with Vladimir Putin. So there are a lot of paradoxes in this story. Cozying up, schmoozing with the Russians, whilst threatening the Chinese, threatening the Iranians. Listen up, you Berk. The world has changed. It has moved on. People don't want war, and they don't want a continuation of rule by billionaires and multimillionaires and mad dog generals. So, Mr. Trump, if you want to be more than a one-term president, then you better start wising up. Now, we'll be talking to Rod Liddell, my old adversary, over at The Spectator, about these matters and no doubt one or two others as well. If you want to join in, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0344 499 1000, that's the number to call to join in the great debate, or you can tweet us at George Galloway at Talk Radio, and you can text and email also. Details on the website. Now, as I said in the beginning, in no uncertain terms, there is a new report which recommends rebels in the PLP to isolate themselves from Jeremy Corbyn to retain their seats in a lifeboat strategy. It doesn't sound like much of a lifeboat to me, but maybe political commentator Bobby Friedman can persuade me otherwise. Bobby, welcome back.
Thanks, George.
Tell me about this report. How credible is it, and who's getting in the lifeboat in your view?
Well, I think it is a credible report. It's a sensible report. If you look at how Labour has been performing in recent parliamentary by-elections, I think it will have a lot of Labour MPs, not just moderates, but Labour MPs from across the parliamentary party looking over their shoulder. And I think it's sensible that they try and find a way to hold up their own personal vote in their constituencies in the event that Labour implodes electorally at the next election.
Well, you say that, but there was yet another local government by-election last night in Kent, in which Labour got 62% of the vote in a straight fight with the Conservatives, not in the industrial heartlands, but in Kent. And actually,
how many people voted in that election? What was the total number?
I don't know, but I'll get you the figures. My clever friends will even now be churning it out. But it was 62% of the vote in a straight fight. But every Thursday, there are local government by-elections, as you know, and Labour is performing fantastically well in them. Now, the parliamentary by-elections that you're talking about, Richmond and Sleaford, are by-elections in which, A, Labour had and has never had any chance of winning, and B, where the candidates were precisely the anti-Corbyn type of candidate who are now thinking about their personal vote and buttressing it.
Well, I think you're right that Labour wasn't in with a shot in Richmond, but in Sleaford it was the second biggest party at the last election. So you would imagine that if Labour was serious about becoming a government, it would be the sort of by-election where even if you're not going to win it, you would want to challenge. But instead of coming second, it ended up coming fourth. And the most that could be said afterwards was, well, at least we kept our deposit. It's about parliamentary elections, because ultimately local council elections don't make you Prime Minister, don't get you into government. But also the figures that were being talked about. Jeremy Corbyn mentioned one election recently where the Labour candidate won with 98 votes. There are so few people voting in a lot of these elections that you can't read anything into it. And there's such local issues that you can't read anything into it. But if you look at a national level, parliamentary level, Labour is consistently underperforming in election after election. And that's why Labour MPs do need to be worried. I think they probably do accept that Corbyn's going to lead them into the next election. So I think they have to find a way of mitigating that risk.
How would they do that then? Tell me what that would look like, this isolation strategy.
Well, I think it's two things. First of all, it's about actually presenting a meaningful programme of government, because Corbyn's first and biggest problem is that you don't see him. He's not around. In this report, it was found about 67% of people felt that they didn't, when asked to name one thing that Corbyn stood for, they didn't know what was the main thing that Corbyn and the Labour Party were saying at the moment. So the first thing is actually to provide some meaningful opposition, because that isn't happening at the moment. But the next thing is to actually deal with the issues that people are concerned about at the moment and build on their personal votes. And frankly, they've got to put out a different agenda to the Corbyn agenda by saying to people that actually Labour can be a meaningful electoral force, which it isn't at the moment. It's saying it's not a wasted vote.
But these people will have to stand on the Labour Party's policy for government, not their own. If they want to stand on their own, they could, of course, stand as independents, but they won't do that, will they?
They won't, much as Jeremy Corbyn, who voted time and time again against the Labour leadership over a period of 30 years, stood as a Labour Party candidate at every election over that period, and didn't sign up to what the Labour Party had in its manifesto. So I don't see how Jeremy Corbyn could possibly object to that. If it was good enough for him, it's probably good enough for his own MPs at the moment.
What about the members that will be expected to get these MPs in their lifeboat over the line? Those members, based on the results of the Labour leadership election, are overwhelmingly in support of Jeremy Corbyn. How are they going to fight an election for someone who's doing his best or her best to isolate themselves from Corbyn?
Well, I think they'll have to think of two things. The first is whether they want to lose their MP, because it's all well and good being a local party member if you have an MP, but you don't want to lose that MP. So it's about being realistic, and I think Labour Party members will have to be realistic, and it's about remembering the 9 million people who voted for Labour, and I think they have a stake in the party. If you look at the people who voted Labour at the last election, this report again asked them who they thought was the better Prime Minister, and Jeremy Corbyn only just was ahead of Theresa May. So about half of Labour voters for 2015 seem to prefer Theresa May to Jeremy Corbyn. So Labour members want to keep their MPs, and generally they'll be on board with their own local MPs who they know, who they campaigned for last time. And I imagine they will trust them to do what's best to actually keep their seat, because this is what the choice that Labour MPs have. This is why it's called a lifeboat strategy, because they will sink without it. There are seats up and down the country, and we're going to see this in Copeland when we have the by-election there for Jamie Reid's seat. That is a prime example of it's no surprise Jamie Reid wanted to go, because it's a prime example of a seat where 2,500 majority in the north, concerns about immigration, a pro-nuclear seat. He'd probably have lost at the next election, and that's the kind of thing that Labour MPs have got to face up to.
But it used to be a very much bigger majority. He's the MP that has steadily whittled the majority away.
Well, I don't think you can put it all on Jamie Reid. I mean, the
who should
Labour
we put
Party
it on then?
Well, it's the general trend of what's happened to Labour, that it's since 2001 its vote has gradually been declining.
But you're blaming it on Corbyn. Corbyn's only been in for a year, and yet you're acknowledging a steady decline in Labour's vote since 2001.
Well, I mean, there's obviously been a decline in Labour's vote because it's not in government anymore. So, I mean, that's obvious, isn't it? But,
no, but it was in government in 2000. It was in government in 2005, and the 9 million used to be 14 million. But look, we don't have time to bog down on this point because I've got a more important one to ask you. You say concerns about immigration, but Jamie Reid is a Euro fanatic, and most of these anti-Corbyn MPs are Euro fanatics. So if they lose their seats, they're going to lose them because of their love affair with an institution and all that goes with it that is hated, especially in the north and especially in Labour-held constituencies.
Well, they've got two potential routes there. You know, one is that I think a lot of these moderate MPs, you take someone like Chuck Umunna, for example, who, although he is, an absolute Europhile, of course, is accepting Brexit. But this is an issue for the Labour Party. It's about trying to put forward a policy on Brexit. And again, this survey found that that Labour voters, as well as Tory voters and everyone else, trusted the Conservatives more to deliver on Brexit than they do Jeremy Corbyn. So it's as much a Jeremy Corbyn problem as it is for those local MPs. But it's also about the fact that there are other issues, not just Brexit. And Jeremy Corbyn just simply isn't able to appeal to people in the north in the way that Labour needs to do if it wants to hold on to these heartland seats, that it must do. And this is the oddity of the Corbyn leadership, that it's about looking over its shoulder. Instead of looking at the seats that it needs to become a government, it's actually got to concentrate on just trying to hold on desperately to the seats that they already have. And the trouble is, an Islington MP, London MP, who isn't putting himself out there, is never going to win over enough people. And that's why Labour isn't even looking to win more seats. It's just trying to hang on.
But you say that Jeremy Corbyn isn't putting himself out there. There is no Labour leader, and I've known them since Harold Wilson, who has been out there more than Jeremy Corbyn. He packs them in every corner of the land.
He does pack them in. You're absolutely right. He packs them in meetings for a very select group of people. The hardcore Corbyn support, absolutely, he appeals to them. But that's not enough. You can't be a protest movement. And that, Jeremy Corbyn is very effective at that. He's very effective at speaking at meetings about whipping up support amongst his supporters. What he isn't doing is setting forward an agenda for government and putting forward a policy platform that is appealing across the spectrum.
But that's because your friends have, from the day and hour he was elected, been trying to sabotage him.
Well, I'm not sure who my friends, who you think...
Oh, everyone listening to this knows who your friends are, Bobby.
Well, why didn't you tell me? Because I'm not sure who you're referring to.
Your friends whose virtues you've been extolling for the last 12 minutes and 37 seconds.
Oh, well, if you're talking about Labour moderates, yes, that's right. That is right. Of course, they haven't backed Jeremy Corbyn. But that doesn't stop Corbyn going
Doesn't
out
it?
there.
Doesn't it?
No, it doesn't
you
stop
may
him
be
going
a
out there.
political commentator, Bobby, but you don't know that much about politics. But thanks for joining us, self-styled political commentator, Bobby Friedman. Tell me what you thought of what you heard. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Now, coming up later in the programme, we'll continue wrapping up the big stories of the year by looking at the Labour coup with Alex Nuns, author of The Candidate, and also, after 10 p.m, Ian Lee is on air for the last of his regular shows of the year. And this Christmas Eve, Martin Roberts will be live from his treehouse with a very festive surprise and some Christmas songs too. DIY Dave will be live with him in the studio, ready to answer any questions, plus some of the funniest bits of the show so far. That's Martin Roberts this Saturday on Christmas Eve from 11. Well, my last guest was up a tree somewhere, if not in a tree house. I had a quick look at the Twitter there during the break, and most people grasped that his stuttering and stammering were really because of the paucity of his position. Now, look, I'm being blunt about this. If Labour puts up as candidates these traitors who have done their best to wreck the Labour Party because they didn't like its leader, who want to isolate themselves in a lifeboat strategy, then they will lose and deserve to lose those seats. So either Labour has to find better parliamentary candidates, or it is indeed going down to defeat. And I hope that 2017 will bring some good news on that front. Let's hear from Laura in London. Laura.
Yeah, hi, good evening, George.
Hi.
I heard your guest, Bobby or whoever he was.
Bobby Friedman.
Well, there you go. Thank you. He saying to you that Labour members will support and stand by the Labour MPs that they previously voted in. Well, I did vote in a Labour MP, and I won't be voting for him again. I won't.
I think there's a lot of people. I mean, why should Labour members work for the election of someone who spent the whole of this Parliament undermining the Labour Party and its elected leader? Why should they do that?
Well, George, well, you know what I told you before about housing, damp, mould, this, that,
yes.
excess cold. Well, I went to see to a public meeting of my Labour MP, and in public I told him about how this had gone on for almost 2 decades, and it had wrecked my health, and I'd burdened the NHS and everything with chronic illness. And how interested do you think he was? Zero. Zero. He zero. He swiftly went on to take other questions from other people present. A couple of people at the meeting were astonished, and they came over to me afterwards and said, you must approach him now before he leaves the room so that he can help you. And I said, but didn't you hear what he said? He wasn't interested. And they said, no, he must be. He's your MP. He's our MP. He's got to be interested. That you voted him in, and he's here to represent you. And they pushed me forward. They pushed me on to him. So in front of them, I asked him again. I put it to him again, and he asked me for the name of my housing association, and I told him. And he said, oh, yes, I've heard of them. I know that they're notorious, a nightmare to deal with. And I'm sorry I can't get involved. I wish you the best of luck. And off he pranced, wearing his cashmere or whatever, into the dark night.
Now, we'll not hold his cashmere against him as long as he bought it from money honestly earned. But I've got to tell you something that MPs will not like to hear. The vast majority, I mean 99% of MPs, care only, or at least primarily, about still being MPs after the next election.
That's right.
The knowledge that one is to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully, as Dr. Johnson said. So these people can and might be hanged in the morning in 2020 or whenever Theresa May calls the election. And that's the only power that people have.
Well, George, he should be representing me. He should be helping me. He didn't
Not Laura, if he gets re-elected anyway. You see, if people don't respect themselves, why would anyone else respect them? If you give your votes away cheaply to a charlatan, and I don't know who your MP is, and I don't want you to say.
He's in the cabinet now.
Well, there you go.
And I will not be even if there's no other choice, I will not give him my vote again, because I gave it to him before. He didn't give a damn. He wasn't interested, doesn't want to get involved with housing, and doesn't want to represent me or help me.
OK, Laura, that's a fairly typical story, I'm sorry to say. Let me give you the number again, 0344 499 1000, if you want to join in with your experiences, what you thought of Mr. Bobby Friedman, the friend of the moderates, in the lifeboat strategy of isolating themselves from the Labour Party. Now, I didn't perhaps press him on this point as much as I ought. If these people want to be independents, want to isolate themselves from the party they nominally represent, want to run on their own manifesto, their own programme for government, then the remedy is theirs. I have myself availed myself of that remedy and beaten all the big parties, not once but twice, because I didn't care if I was re-elected to Parliament. I don't regard the summit or the limit of my political life just spending 5 years in the lush carpets and the svelte upholstery of the House of Commons. But most of them care about nothing else but that. So you have to tell them now that they cannot automatically count on your support. And if they want to isolate themselves from the Labour Party, they should run as independents. But they will not do that because they are rancid, opportunistic cowards. Cowards with a big yellow streak running down their back. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Cool Daddy says on Twitter, great scathing introduction regarding those MPs who want to isolate themselves. I think the best isolation would be unemployment, if you ask me. Let's hear from John in Lancashire on that. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. George. It's really interesting. It's the same old story, isn't it?
Same old, yes.
Yeah, the same old negative views of Jeremy Corbyn. They don't seem to have got the drift yet, do they? You know.
No, they never will. It's evidently clear that, as clear as the nose on your face, that the 2 landslide victories that Corbyn won, the 44 coordinated, hourly, on Sky News resignations from the Labour front bench, were just the first part of the coup. They now intend to destroy Labour's chances of winning the election as the last available means of ensuring that Corbyn does not become Prime Minister and thus ensuring that Theresa May remains as the Prime Minister. How's that for treachery?
Yeah, because she's delaying the election time, isn't she? Very nicely.
Yeah.
So-called elected MP.
Now, do you have in Lancashire any of these lifeboat strategists? Do you have any MPs that are going to be isolating themselves from the Labour Party and imagining that their own personal vote, as Friedman laughingly called it, or laughably called it, is going to get them through?
I'm not sure, really, to tell you the truth, George, but...
I'm sure, John. I'm very sure.
It's public, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I think there was a certain Adolf person who relied on his own party to get him into power.
Well, you see, I've no doubt names will emerge, but everybody who resigned from the Labour front bench and has refused to come back on it is a traitor. Yeah. That's my rule of thumb, and likely to be manning a lifeboat strategy when the general election comes. So they should be removed.
Yeah, before.
Yeah, they should be removed now. The Labour Party should hold reselection meetings, and let's see how many of them survive that. No lifeboat out of that one. John in Lancashire, thanks. Guy in Stoke is up next. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, George, yeah. Mr. Friedman, is he supposed to be allied to the Labour Party, or is he just a pundit, a political pundit?
From what I understand, he wrote a very insulting review, a play about Corbyn, if I've got the right man. I've never heard of him before he was on the show a few months ago, so I don't know very much about him, but he certainly talked as if he was in the Labour Party, and certainly was happy to associate himself with what he calls the moderates, though not much moderate about their behaviour, if you ask me.
Well, he's got some opinions, but there's a couple of facts we can put to the man, which was that Jeremy stood against 3 candidates in the first election. He won that election. Then in the second election, a candidate was nominated. She stood down so that the next candidate could combat him single-handedly. Yeah. So he's effectively won an election against 5 Labour MPs. He's won against 5 contestants. Now, the people who are so against Jeremy, those MPs who are so against him, how difficult was it for them to get together and say, well, let's put someone up there who might give him a contest? And they didn't. And if we compare that with the Conservatives, they've got a Prime Minister who isn't popular, but they are that smart as they don't wash their dirty clothes in public, and they'll support the woman to get their own objectives. So I suppose what I'm saying is, 1, they are traitors, like you say, but 2, they're not particularly bright. Can they not? 5 people have stood against the man, and he's won.
I mean, let's leave the first lot aside for just 1 minute. The 2 candidates, one of whom dropped out, that put themselves up against Corbyn after, at exactly the moment of the Chilcot report, put up 44 resignations, coordinated, carefully calibrated, one every hour, a new one on Sky News every single hour, attacking Corbyn in the most savage and personal terms, 44 of them, and then a leadership contest. And who did they bring to the party? Angela Eagle and Wally, what's his name? Smith, Owen Smith? I mean, are you serious? In the party of Wilson and Callaghan and Jenkins and Crossland and Crossman and Castle and Ben and Foote, and I could go on and on. Angela Eagle and Owen Smith? Are you serious?
George, you could have put to Mr. Friedman, name one candidate who could tour the country, do the rallies in the open air because of the amount of people who would attend, and there would be no one.
Nobody would turn up.
That amount of interest. What is up with these MPs in the Labour Party?
Do you remember that picture, Guy, when Smith was giving away ice cream cones up in Liverpool, and the ice cream van thought they were on a winner, thought that everyone would turn up for an ice cream cone off Owen Smith, and the ice cream van went away still laden with all their ice cream because there wasn't enough people there to eat a row of 99 cones.
This is a fact in my city. Jeremy Corbyn filled the town centre. The other guy came. He went to a canteen in a small factory, a canteen, and guess what? It wasn't even full. He couldn't even fill the canteen.
OK, Guy, thanks for that. Great to talk to you again. Here's Michael in Slough on the same subject. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello again, George.
Hi.
All right, a big fan. I've been listening to you all week, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
Right, the point I'm going to make is the last time I spoke, I said to you about Blair and anybody could have won those elections. I just want to say that what people are missing is the fact that I've always voted Labour, and I voted Labour for a reason. And, you know, Blair and his likes didn't deliver the kind of Labour that I wanted or people want. Yeah, right? Yeah. They didn't. He doesn't represent the kind of people that need representing. And that's what Corbyn does. This is what the fact that these people are missing, right? He's getting back to those people who thought they were voting for Labour and found out they weren't really voting for Labour, they were voting for something else. We won't go into that, right, because people will say, oh, you know, but this is what he represents, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with you, Michael, and if he does relaunch in 2017 as Britain's answer to Bernie Sanders, and he gets out there on the stump, on the streets, in Slough, in Stoke, everywhere around the country, he can turn this around.
I totally agree with you, George, but what the problem he's facing, as you highlighting, is these hypocrites, right, who, you know, they try and say, oh, they turn to his record, right, and they forget the sort of subjects that he voted against the government on.
Yeah, he was right on every single one. He was voting Labour. It was the government that was voting anti-Labour.
That's the point. You're making the points for me there, George. You know?
Sorry, it's because my blood's up, Michael. I beg your pardon.
No. I didn't mean it as a criticism. I'm just saying that that's the point that people, these commentators, right? They've got agendas, and they're frightened of him, right? As has been pointed out. But what he needs to do is get tougher. George, he needs you, right? Because he's not tough enough on these people. He's maybe too much of a gentleman. Maybe that
he is too much of a gentleman, and he's tolerated this treachery in his own parliamentary Labour Party for far too long, and 2017 has to be a turning point on that.
They come on every programme they can get themselves on, right? To sort of, you know, people are going to be put off that. You heard it yourself, right? The lady was on a couple of people ago, and she said, I won't vote for... Because they're torn. They want to vote for a Corbyn Labour, but they know if they're voting for these people, they're not voting for a Corbyn Labour. They're not voting for Labour. They're voting for, as you say, most of these people. You know, honestly...
No, your points are all well honed and well delivered, Michael, and all of them hit the target, and I'm grateful to you. 0344 499 1000 if you want to chip in on this great debate, or you can tweet me and us at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Those who walk in the middle of the road tend to get run over. UK drives on the left, EU on the right, says York's lass. And Andrew Spears says we must back Jeremy and fight to bring him forward into the mainstream to bolster and uplift the great politician he is. Let's fight. And Ricardo Picasso says Labour MP's big plan is to start isolating from Corbyn. Haven't they been doing that ever since he was elected? Very good point, Ricardo. Twinkleberry says, this idiot George Galloway has on Talk Radio right now, bashing Corbyn, is spewing utter propaganda and lies, endless logical fallacies. He didn't deal with the biggest of those logical fallacies. He said that Jamie Reid, who's just like a rat, abandoned ship for a better paid job in the nuclear industry, has ratted on his constituents whose vote he sought less than 2 years ago, a man who has abandoned his party and his constituents for a shed load of money, that he was right to do so because of mounting concerns over immigration. But Jamie Reid is a Euro fanatic, an EU fanatic. He supports the EU and all of its works, as do the vast majority of these so-called moderates. And they want to blame Jeremy Corbyn. James Ball says, I live in the poorest area in Wales. Labour are going to get hammered here due to anti-Jeremy Corbyn Labour candidates. And Marie McFarlane says, Bobby Friedman typically espoused the business model. Corbyn is part of a £6 150,000 membership, and we are angry. And Buster says, that's 1,000 members in every constituency. If the party back him, it will grow and grow. And Marie again says, Friedman's pals are continuing Thatcher's legacy. The Labour Party needs to stand new, experienced, left candidates. And Peter says, please, George, can you get Mr Corbyn to sack all those traitor, backstabbing, blood-stained Blairites? It's time to call them out. That's an SMS from Peter in Glasgow. Well, don't think I haven't tried, Peter. Ricardo says, nuclear bombs are a deterrent to peace, not to war. That's in relation to something that's about to come up, our discussion on Trump and his Twitter threats. Fra Hughes, clever caller from the other night from Belfast, says Corbyn is not the threat, it's what he represents, traditional Labour values. The Blairites are neoliberals. And NB1RCH says, I'm not a Labour fan, but George is right on Corbyn's challengers. They are hardly of the ilk of Tony Benn. And James says, in Denbighshire, North Wales, we have hemorrhaged Labour votes and support, and now have a Tory MP, though the seat was Labour from 97 till 2015. Labour Old Guard here will not support their leader, and UKIP and the Tories are about to make the citizens pay for it. Well, it's been a fast hour, I must say. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to join in. And you can tweet me, tweet at George Galloway, at Talk Radio, and join the great debate over the next 2 hours. And we've got some cracking guests too.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio.
We have ways of making you talk.
Talk Radio.
0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. You can tweet me at George Galloway, us at Talk Radio, preferably both. We'll be talking in the next hour to Alex Nuns, author of The Candidate, the story of Jeremy Corbyn.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
0344 499 1000. That's the number to call to join the great debate with me, George Galloway, here on the mother of all talk shows, only on Talk Radio, every Friday night between 7 and 10. And we've got a cracking couple of hours ahead. Stay with us on Talk Radio.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite! The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Now, a great tweet from Socialist Leroy, who says, don't forget Eagle buying the web address Eagle for Leader the day after Corbyn's first leadership victory. She really gave him a chance. Well, Leroy, I had forgotten that, but I won't forget it again. Let's talk to the author, very, very smart young man who made a memorable appearance here in the studio on the mother of all talk shows just a few months ago. I hope it did his book sales some good, because it's a terrific book called The Candidate. It charted how from nowhere, apparently, Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, and then updated to take account of the challenge against him. Well, Alex Nuns, we've now got another kind of challenge. Apparently the MPs are going to get into a lifeboat fashioned in their own image and isolate themselves. These are quotes, by the way, from the Labour leadership. That's the new tactic. I don't know if you heard the earlier conversation with Bobby Friedman, but I think you could probably imagine the kind of conversation it was if you didn't. Alex, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
George.
So, what did you think when you read that Guardian article today? Was it a retro feeling? Was it déjà vu?
Well, it does seem to be. I mean, if they need a lifeboat, then it's because they made holes in the hull of the Labour Party ship, and rather than try and bail out the water and patch up the holes, now they're looking for lifeboats. So it's a bit galling to hear that kind of thing. The story itself in The Guardian today, I mean, it wasn't clear about the research. It seemed to be focus groups conducted by this guy, James Morris, who used to be Ed Miliband's pollster, who, he's got an agenda himself.
His polls went well, didn't they?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a key advisor to Ed Miliband, and a lot of the policies which turned out not to work so well with the electorate were, in some measure inspired by him. But he's been a Corbyn critic from the start, so it's kind of, I mean, I haven't seen his research, so I don't know if it's credible and if it's worth taking account of. But it's not clear from the Guardian story exactly what the findings were. For example, it mentions that this key finding, which your guest mentioned earlier, that 67% of voters don't know what Corbyn stands for. That comes from November 2015, so that's just shortly after Corbyn became leader. So it's that's out of date for a start.
Well, I wish I'd known that, because that's bordering on misleading.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, but this is it's a kind of permanent agenda from the Labour right to talk the party down, and it's a massive challenge that Jeremy Corbyn's got to turn.
Well, there is. I want to move on to that if I can, Alex. The latest opinion poll is not that bad. 31% Labour, 38% Conservative. And the local government by-elections, which I follow closely, are invariably good. But the last two parliamentary by-elections, maybe Richmond can be set aside as a special case, because it was obviously not Labour territory, and it was a Labour candidate who was totally against Jeremy Corbyn, who was the candidate. He had already climbed into the lifeboat and he lost his deposit. And Sleaford wasn't Labour territory either, though Friedman made the fair point that Labour had been second and is now fourth. So it's paradoxical, some of this data, isn't it?
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see what happens in the next one in the northwest, in Copeland, because before the coup, Labour's vote was holding up really well in parliamentary by-elections. In fact, its vote increased in all but one parliamentary by-election, and it won every by-election that was held under Jeremy Corbyn from the time he became leader until the coup.
And won the Bristol mayoralty, and won the the London mayoralty.
Yeah, and had an incredible result in the London Assembly elections, which people don't talk about enough, because the Labour polling in that election for actual local members to represent constituencies, and also a kind of PR element in the top-up vote, was the best it's ever had, ever.
Well, Labour outpolled Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
Got more votes than Sadiq Khan got.
Well, Sadiq Khan's personal performance, in terms of if you compare his performance with the performance of the Labour Party in those Assembly elections, which happened at the same time, his personal performance was worse than Ken Livingstone's against the Labour Party, worse than Boris Johnson's compared to the Conservative Party. So his personal performance was not all that great. But then
you can add, Alex, if I may say so, the 154,000 people who voted for me, which was a Corbyn vote also.
And so, that London Assembly result was quite extraordinary. But I don't think there's any doubt that the coup and the subsequent leadership election, and just the constant division and constant backstabbing and all the venom that was spewed out in the press, has damaged Jeremy Corbyn's personal polling ratings and the party as a whole, the polling ratings of the party as a whole. And that's hardly surprising, really. I mean, it would be incredible if that hadn't happened, and I think it's a huge challenge to turn that around. I don't think that Labour MPs saying they're going to isolate themselves and not pitch in, rather just go and find a lifeboat, is the way to turn it around, but they have their own idiosyncratic means of doing things.
Well, what's going to happen in Copeland if they pick another Jamie Reid? If they pick someone who, although claiming to accept the Brexit vote, doesn't really, and everybody knows it, if they pick someone who's actually a part of the metropolitan elite, the Blairite wing of the Labour Party, they'll go down to defeat, and they'll deserve to.
It's It's unclear what's going to happen because, I mean, that might be one possible outcome. I think the threat of UKIP is, you can't listen to a newspaper pundit or watch the news on the TV without hearing that UKIP's going to take Labour's votes in the north. But that hasn't been happening in the council by-elections so far.
They didn't even stand in Kent last night. It was a straight fight between Labour and the Conservatives, and Labour got 62% of the vote.
And they haven't got any money either, UKIP. So I'm not sure. I mean, it would be interesting to see how much of a threat they are, because it's the first big test of Paul Nuttall and his strategy of going after Labour voters in the north. And so far, there's no evidence that it's going to work, even though you wouldn't know that from listening to the coverage. But obviously, it's only a 2,000 majority, so it's not a big. There's not a big.
It used to be big before Jamie Reid came along.
Yeah, and we'll have to see how well the party performs, because it should be. I mean, I think that the Richmond by-election can be written off because, if you have less people voting for your candidate than you have members of the party in a constituency, something strange is happening there. So I don't think that one counts. Sleaford was obviously very disappointing that they dropped from second to fourth, but in constituencies that have traditionally been Labour and that are held by Labour, before the coup, Labour, as I say, Labour were performing very, very well. So you'd hope that would continue. And you'd hope that they would be able to defy the doomsayers. I think it should be an opportunity for massive campaigning. I mean, the big resource that the Labour Party's got is well over 500,000 members, and there should be a massive attempt to mobilise them and get them out on the streets and try and basically mobilise that political vehicle and see as a test bed, really, to see how well that works and how well it will do in the general election.
Yeah, but you're not dealing with the question I'm putting to you, which is, I'll repeat it, if Labour puts up someone who is completely antithetical to Jeremy Corbyn, why would thousands of Labour members from around the country head up to Copeland to work for them?
Well, that's a good point, and that's the key thing. The key thing is what's going to motivate members to go out and work. I don't personally think that the individual candidate in most situations has a huge effect on the vote. I think people vote on the party, they don't vote on the individual candidates, maybe slightly more in a by-election, but in general, this is why I think it's ridiculous when you hear these Labour candidates, Labour MPs, saying, talking about lifeboats and so on, because they owe their position, they owe everything they have to the party, which has put them there.
Exactly.
The resources and the campaigning infrastructure of the party and the policies and everything else. And they're not, as you say, if they could go and stand as independents and see how they do, and it's only very few people who succeed in when they try to do that. So
only Ken Livingstone and me, and we're both out of the Labour Party. Now, I have heard that the Come Dancing star, what's it called now, Strictly Come Dancing star, Ed Balls, might be in for it. Can you give us any inside track on that?
I don't have any inside track on that. I hope not. But obviously, it's down to the local party members ultimately to select the candidate. That's how it should be.
Well, it doesn't have to be, of course. Under the by-election rules, the National Executive have a massive role to play in choosing the candidate.
Yeah, and they have been in by-elections that they've been having so far. They've been presenting shortlists and so on, and trying to narrow down the range of candidates. But, the local party should fight for its right to select a good local candidate from among their own ranks, I hope. I don't think, Ed Balls may be a celebrity by now, but I think his political strategy was tested to destruction at the last general election, so I don't see that that's a route to renewal.
Alex Nuns, how's your book doing, The Candidate?
It's doing very well. People have been very nice about it and surprisingly haven't had any particularly trenchant critiques. I'm still waiting for those to come in, but at the moment, yeah, it's doing very well.
And who published it? How do we get it?
All Books, orbooks.com. If you go online, you can order a copy.
Thanks for coming on, Alex Nuns from Bishop Stortford, author of The Candidate, recapping 2016, recapping Corbyn and the Labour coup. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to join in. Now, you can also tweet at George Galloway, at Talk Radio. It's important that you put both in. Corbyn needs to be less gentlemanly, says David Morgan. He should call out the riders on the gravy train, the neoliberals. And James says, if I were JC's right-hand man, those MPs would all be booked appointments at the job centre on Tuesday. David says, 124,000 children are homeless at Christmas in the 5th richest country in the world. This is why we need a Corbyn win. And Simon Brian Anderson says, where does a left-wing Brexit voter go now? We have no representation in Parliament. Who will champion our cause? Well, I will, Simon. I will. James says Labour MP's lifeboat strategy is a bigger issue, as many Labour county councillors are also clinging to that boat. 0344 499 1000.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Let's hear from Lee in Caldecott. Go ahead, Lee.
Hiya.
Hi there, go ahead.
Well, I don't know much about politics, I have to admit, but it seems to me that a lot of people are wrong about Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes.
It seems to me that if he got all those thousands of people to vote for him into Labour, he could win a general election.
Hundreds of thousands, actually, Lee.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. It's the
It
biggest...
really seems like he could win.
Let me...
A lot of people are saying,
yeah.
he can't win, or Labour are wasting their time.
Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you for a second, because you were good enough to say politics not necessarily your subject.
No.
Labour is the biggest party in Britain.
Right.
It's the biggest that Labour has ever been. It is the biggest Labour party in the entire world. It's the biggest party in Europe. It has 650,000 members, all paying top dollar and producing many millions of pounds of income that can be used in a campaign. What's not to love?
Well, exactly. I mean, I'm not a politically minded person. I didn't vote on the last election. But it seems to me that Jeremy Corbyn could win. And a lot of people are saying, he can't win, or the Labour are wasting their time. Why are we having Jeremy Corbyn as a leader? And I'm thinking, well, all these hundreds of thousands of people, all these thousands of people have signed up specifically to vote for him. That's got to be a microcosm of society in Britain in general.
I mean, you're right, Lee. It's a complete logical fallacy. They keep telling us that Corbyn can't win, in which case, why are they trying so hard to get rid of him? Why is the media constantly trying to destroy him if he can't win? If he couldn't win, the media would be trying to make him stay, not go.
Right.
Lee, thanks for the call. Good of you to give us that warning that politics wasn't your bag, but actually, you know more about politics than the political commentator we had on at the top of the show, if you want my honest opinion. Fra, the clever caller from Belfast, is back on the line. Go ahead, Fra.
Well, if you tell people they're clever, they're going to come back for more. What can I say? George, I'm phoning up actually about what's happened in Berlin, and I'm not trying to detract from anything you said about Corbyn. I'm a huge Corbyn fan myself. But I followed the story of the truck attack at the Berlin Christmas market, and just some of the things that have stuck out in my mind as being kind of not necessarily following in proper order of what should happen in kind of these attacks. At CNN Online had actually printed material that the American government had called for its citizens not to go near Christmas markets in Berlin. I'm also thinking about the gun that this gentleman was supposed to have pulled out on the Italian police when he was shot, killed or executed in Milan. It's the ballistics in that gun. Now, if that is the gun that shot the guy that was in the cab, I would be more believable, of the story that's been put out by the state and state kind of organisations and press as to how this whole story's unfolded. Another wee question I have is, how is an asylum seeker refugee who I assume not working have the finances to travel at very, very, very short notice halfway across Europe? And I don't know if you've seen the video. There's a video still of
he's released a martyrdom video. Yes.
Yes, the one specifically I'm referring to is when he's outside the mosque, which I believe was in Milan. I mean, this guy's supposed to be the most wanted terrorist mass murderer in recent European history, and he's standing at the front door of a mosque looking as if he doesn't have a concern in the world.
Well, I mean, he sent these videos to the official, if we can use those terms,
Yes.
ISIS media office, and they put them out after.
Okay, they put them online?
Yes,
Yeah.
after his death. As to finances, well, of course, if he was a member of ISIS or ISIS-oriented terrorist networks, then they presumably got him out. He presumably went somewhere after the mass murder, and somebody got him out. Now, how he got from Berlin to France without being stopped is, of course, a very big question, and doesn't say much for border security in the countries across which he would have had to pass. Doesn't say much for German security, when they presumably were on an all-points alert for a guy that was fleeing the scene of the crime. Of course, that wasn't helped by the fact that for 18 hours they told us they already had the guy.
Absolutely, George, yeah. But I suppose with the open borders within Europe, travel, I assume, is a lot easier because everyone who's supposedly already in the borders within the European community is, I assume, deemed to be there. So it was difficult leaving those 18 hours before they sent out the kind of alert from. I didn't actually realise, George, that those video things had been put up on.
They were issued. They were issued by ISIS. Can I just tax you on a different subject for a moment?
Go ahead.
I'm being dogged on Twitter by a clown from the Irish Labour Party, a councillor, Dermot Lacey, who's a Labour councillor in Dublin, and this arises from the picture I've been highlighting of the most scandalous and shocking queue of thousands of hungry people in Dublin that came out yesterday, and I've been circulating it. Now, he says that the last thing the Irish Labour Party, needs is a lecture from me. But am I not right in saying that the Irish Labour Party has destroyed itself by its embrace of the very Blairite nostrums that helped almost to kill the British Labour Party?
Absolutely, George, and that's why people listen to this show and love you so much as a political commentator. What I'm reading along with your analysis is people here talking about the fight for national liberation in Dublin in 1816, where people like James Connolly, the Scottish socialist, who fought the Irish Republican cause in order to free Ireland from British imperial conquest or continued conquest. He talked about the landlords. He talked about how if you just changed your flag but didn't change your form of government, that all you're doing is changing one landlord with another and one businessman with another and one capitalist with another, to paraphrase what he was saying. So 100 years on from the revolution, that was the embrace socialism and freedom for the Irish people, we still have neocons in government. We have a Labour Party who promised so much and delivered so little. And in fact, the Irish Labour Party, to my mind, would be a complete mirror image of the British Labour Party. So all the ills and woes that you point out from the Blairites within Corbyn's administration are exactly the same in Ireland, and that has been noted by the people, and their vote has absolutely been decimated.
And this party, founded by James Connolly, of course, the Irish Labour Party, it's a disgrace and a scandal that in the centenary year it's in the hands of clowns like this councillor who's dogging me. So, anyway, thank you, Fra. A fantastic call as always. Let's stay in the north of Ireland and talk with Andrew in Helens Bay. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hi, how are you, George?
I'm good, thanks. Yes, good to hear from you.
Yes, I was hearing your last caller talking about the Irish Labour Party. So they are, by golly gosh, we shouldn't be having any arguments with them. Look at their Labour Party. They're down to fourth and basically lost all their seats at the last Irish elections. So yeah. I think he should keep himself out of our matters. But yes, on to Jeremy Corbyn. I think one of the things that I've noticed recently that I'm a bit worried about, it's nothing about Jeremy Corbyn. I think Jeremy Corbyn's a fantastic leader. But one thing he's got to get around, in my opinion, or maybe it's probably the fault of the mainstream media, I would say, in other words, is now that they've lost the case of trying to get him out by talking trash about him. They're just simply ignoring him. They're not mentioning him in any of their stories whatsoever.
No, that's right. He beats Theresa May every single Wednesday at Prime Minister's Question Time, and therefore Prime Minister's Question Time has been relegated to the Conference League, to the Vauxhall Conference League in terms of political news.
Oh, indeed, yeah. And then, of course, whenever you watch the Daily Politics or whatever, that there's basically no one on to support Corbyn either. It's just
or on Question Time. When's the last time a supporter of Corbyn was on Question Time?
I never watched.
7 weeks out of 8, it's an anti-Corbyn Labour person that's on the show.
No, they're hard to find. At the moment, at least in the PLP. But yes, on the Guardian article, this isolationist strategy that they're trying to propose at the moment, whenever they're the ones who started the fire themselves, and now
indeed, Alex Nunn's put it well, didn't he? The only reason they need a lifeboat is because they've knocked big holes in the Labour Party ship.
Well, you've seen yourself. They're just basically they're trying to jump out of it now. Like, I mean, where's the last time Angela Eagle's been mentioned? Was it July after she basically conceded Joe and Smith? And then where's Wally himself after he lost the thing? Has just disappeared from the scene. So yeah.
Very well put, Andrew, as always, in Helens Bay in the north of Ireland. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Now, coming up after the break, we'll talk with Spectator journalist extraordinaire Rod Liddle about Russia stepping up their rhetoric, it says here, and telling the world how powerful they are, it says here. Who writes this stuff? Also after 10 p.m, Ian Lee is on the air. And he's always worth listening to. And on Christmas Day, wake up with the great Paul Ross full-set breakfast from 6 a.m. as they cross the world to see how Christmas celebrations are going everywhere, from New Zealand to the United States, plus Antarctica, plus some very special Christmas guests pop in. That's Christmas Day with Paul Ross from 6 a.m. only on Talk Radio.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Now, somebody really ought to take that telephone away from Donald J. Trump. Doesn't he realize that in just 27 days, he'll be the president of the United States, and he is digging one diplomatic hole after another? The latest is the threat, I think it's a promise in his mind, but the threat to ensure a massive nuclear arms race in which he says America will prevail, all the while promising to pave America with new infrastructure paid for by the state. I don't know where the money's coming from for either, let alone both. But maybe my next guest does. He is a brilliant writer, a great editor, and a controversialist, let me say. Rod Liddle in North Yorkshire, welcome to the show.
Thanks, George.
Tell me this, what do you think about Trump and Twitter, first of all? Wouldn't he be better staying away now?
Well, of course he should. Of course he should stay away. And, you know, it may be, George, you may have considered this just as I have, that he may not be the brightest chap in the world.
I think that's becoming apparent, yeah.
It is becoming apparent. Nonetheless, you know, I don't know what you thought at the time that he was elected. I was marginally relieved that it was him rather than Clinton.
Me too, you know, exactly the same, yeah.
Yeah. But I never had any illusions that this was necessarily a great statesman who was going to lead us into a world of prosperity.
Well, Jack Kennedy, he definitely ain't.
No.
He's oddly inarticulate for a man that bellows a lot.
Incredibly inarticulate. That is one of the reasons, the main reason I was so ill-disposed towards him, that he couldn't string a sentence together. But nonetheless, you know, George, it's a bit like Putin. Trump was elected on this ticket of making America great again. And one thing about making America great again is by having more weapons than anyone else. And so he is sort of duty-bound to say that sort of stuff, just as, you know, 6,000, 7,000 miles away in Moscow, Putin is duty-bound to come out with the same sort of rhetoric. They have to say that. It's the sort of stuff that they're that their support is based upon. And I guess we both know that.
Yes, although I've actually now looked quite closely at what Putin said, and the key word, and he actually repeated it for emphasis and asked the journalists to pay attention to it, was that Russia was strong enough to defeat any aggressor.
Yeah.
And that's quite an important caveat, isn't it?
Well, sure, of course it is, except it is the same caveat which Russia, under its previous guise of the Soviet Union, has been using since around about 1918, with, in some cases, justification, George, as we both know.
Indeed.
Both in 1917 and indeed in 1942 and after that.
Well, thank God for it, of course, Rod, or you and I would be conducting this conversation in German.
Well, indeed, which would be hazardous for our listeners.
It would be taxing for both of us.
Yeah,
Rod, what you're saying, and I think you're right, is that this kind of talk, especially on Twitter, when you've got to get it into a very small number of characters, is inherently rhetoric and inherently just for show. Isn't it more likely that an early summit between Trump and Putin will probably lead to a new outbreak of amity, certainly on the Syrian front?
Well, you would hope so on the Syrian front, where there is still the most ludicrous rhetoric being ramped up by the West. I guess you heard this morning Peter Ford.
Very good on your former program.
That's right, yeah, and talking great sense about the appalling mess that we have made of Syria, and that Russia, in a sense, is more sinned against than sinning when it comes to what's happened in Aleppo and in the support of President Assad. But no, I think you're absolutely right that if common sense prevails, Donald Trump will see an ally in Vladimir Putin, and that there will be a certain entente between them. I can't see any point in Russia ramping up the rhetoric against in Trump ramping up the rhetoric against Russia. I just don't see the point of it, especially as Trump's main opponent, it would seem, in the world at the moment, other than ISIS, which he said he will wipe from the face of the earth. Well, good luck with that, mate.
Of course,
is China. I mean, that's where his main enmity lies. And Russia's always been seen as an ally. And Putin is far too canny, I think, for Trump.
He is, and it's quite an interesting thing because some people like to compare the two. Certainly they're both kind of macho. Putin's a bit harder around the midriff than Donald is.
Yeah.
He's got a bit more right to strut in a macho way than...
He wrestles bears, George, you know.
But I mean, one is playing chess and the other's playing drafts.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that, in a way, is a problem for the West, if you see it from a Western perspective, that the sort of people we have and have had in the past 4 or 5 years ranged up against Vladimir Putin, if we are to be against Vladimir Putin, have been of very, very low caliber indeed, whereas Putin is actually a very, very clever operator indeed.
And with Lavrov next to him, by far and away the most skilled diplomat in the world,
indeed.
It's a formidable team. However, Rod, let's have a little bit of fun seasonally. You can say that Trump has no taste, and looking at the Golden Trump Towers, it's easy to reach that conclusion.
Yeah.
But he did reject John Bolton because of his moustache.
Well, it is an awful moustache.
It
I mean,
is.
George, you've had moustaches before.
I have, but only when they were in the 1970s. I had a moustache. A man that's got a moustache in 2016 is ipso facto not fit for office, I would say.
That is absolutely right. And if more world leaders would take that point of view and follow that policy, I think we'd be in a far happier place as we approach Christmas.
Now, on the issue you touched on there, and it's one I touched on earlier in the week here on Talk Radio. They said of Greta Garbo, you used to be big in pictures, and she said, I'm still big, it's the pictures that have got small.
Yes, indeed.
We do have a Europe now where there are no big leaders at all. the French president even, although I didn't agree with him politically, Jacques Chirac, François Mitterrand were big figures.
Big figures, yes.
But we've had a succession of smaller figures, Sarkozy and now the hapless Hollande, who's limped off the field with 4% in the opinion polls. The other leaders in the European countries. Isn't this one of the problems of the European Union, that it has no real leaders?
It has, I suppose, it still has. Undoubtedly, the most prominent leader of the last 5-6 years has been Angela Merkel. But she is presumably
She's in big
gone.
trouble now, yeah?
She is presumably gone. And my guess is that there will be no liberal leaders of European countries left within a year or two. And yet, new leaders will come through. It will take a time before. I mean, we didn't like him, George, and I think we were utterly right. But Blair was a big,
to be fair, he was a big figure. What about big figures though that might arise from the right? Now, my son-in-law, who's a betting man, has just told me in a text that Le Pen is now 3-1 on to be the next president of France, and that this twist in the Berlin Christmas market mass murder of the man ending up in Paris has given her a tremendous political boost.
And there will be more boosts to come, because these sort of attacks will happen once every few weeks, maybe once every few days. We've seen them, and it will, sadly, you might argue, buttress the far right, when actually, as you and I might both argue, it's a strong-minded socialist who isn't a liberal, who should really be the beneficiary of this sort of anger from the population.
Exactly.
But I do think that, she's got a terrible reputation, partly because of her father, of course, who was an anti-Semite and a fascist. Marine Le Pen, she is a redistributionist, she's a protectionist. There's a certain amount of socialism within the Front National, albeit limited, and we'll see how far it goes. But she's certainly a major figure, and certainly a very, very competent figure. I can't see anyone in Europe who comes up to that mark just yet. I don't know, maybe Tim Farron, George. I don't know.
That's a brilliant note to end on. I wish you all the best over Christmas, Rod, and look forward to talking to you again in the new year. Thank you.
George.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
Paul. That's Rod Liddle of The Spectator, finishing with the best joke by far of the week. He can't see anyone up to the mark in European political leaders. Maybe Tim Farron. How brilliant is that? 0344 499 1000. Is that his name? Farron or Farron? What's his name? Farron. It's Tim Farron. There you go. That's how much of an impact he's made on me. And I presumably sat in Parliament with him for some years. I must check that out. I actually never set eyes on him before. 0344 499 1000.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0344 499 1000. Some clown in Dublin has just tweeted me to tell me to mind my own business so far as the queue of thousands of hungry people in Dublin are concerned. Well, listen up, you half-wit. The plight of the working people in all countries is my business. James Connolly, who founded your party, lived in the same street as me. He didn't mind his own business. He came to Ireland to assist the people, overthrow the yoke of imperialism, and transform Ireland into a country fit for the great Irish people. You, the Irish Labour Party, are not fit to clean the boots of James Connolly. It is my business, brother, and you'll be hearing more from me about it. Ricardo is in the Glasgow area. I think I know him, and he's a very fine man. Ricardo, welcome.
Greetings, George.
And to you, comrade. Please, what would you like to say?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of interesting comment about Corbyn, and I'd like to have my two tuppence worth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, As you've said before, all day, every day, since July 2015, they've tried to break him as a man.
Yep.
But he's shown exceptional inner strength. Sky and the BBC can point and laugh, but they did the same to Brexit, and they did the same to Trump. And Corbyn's a much more agreeable fellow than Trump, certainly.
Well, I agree entirely with that. And if he was such a stumer, as we'd say in Scotland, they wouldn't be attacking him at all.
Yeah.
They'd be doing their best to keep him in power, keep him in office.
Absolutely.
It's precisely because he is a threat to them, and that if he did win, everything would change. That's why they hate him so much.
Yeah, but you know, he's whatever anyone's views are, he's the most elected leader in Labour history. He's more than earned the right to stand as Labour leader in a general election, and a general election campaign actually plays to all of his strengths and all of Theresa May's weaknesses. He's a great debater. He's a good policy maker. He's good at going around the UK, all over the country, drumming up support. He's actually very electable.
Who's going to turn out to a Theresa May rally?
Yeah, it will be like one of those Owen Smith ice cream stalls.
Fantastic, Ricardo. Lovely to hear your voice again, my friend. Hope to see you soon. Colin is in Glasgow, and he wants to talk about Scottish Labour. Go ahead, Colin.
Hi, George. How you doing?
I'm good, sir. Thanks a lot. Go ahead.
George, it's Keza Duggins I want to talk about. She's the only thing that stops me from voting Labour. So I don't know what the woman's all about. I don't get her, and maybe you can shed a wee bit of light on her.
Well, I mean, I've never met her. She's really very young indeed. But when I think that when I came into Labour politics, the Scottish Labour leader was Willie Ross, succeeded by Bruce Millan, succeeded by Donald Dewar. I've got to think that the Labour leaders in Scotland nowadays are not quite up to the mark.
Yeah. Yep.
They're not quite up to the mark, and they don't have the ability.
Sorry, Josh, for interrupting her, but I think when I listen to her, she's got. I feel as if she's got too much to say and nothing to talk about. If you know what I mean.
I do know exactly. Yeah.
So,
I do know exactly. She's she can gabble on, but the lights are on, but there's nobody home.
Absolutely, and she just puts me off voting Labour, because if that's the leader in Scotland for the Labour Party, I would say we've got problems in Scotland.
Well, the Labour membership in Scotland is, of course, pitifully small. It was once, when I was there, very, very large. When I was the 26-year-old chairman of the entire Labour Party in Scotland, it was a mass organisation, controlling virtually every local authority, holding virtually every parliamentary seat. It was seeded throughout the whole society. It was a great mass party of the working people and their allies. It's none of these things anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we had talent up here, George.
Oh, definitely.
We did.
Look at the leaders that came out of Scotland, even if I disagreed with many of them. Big figures, people like Robin Cook and many, many others, Gordon Brown even. But those days are gone. The Scottish Labour Party is pitifully small. Its political stripe is pitiful. It was the only part of the Labour Party in the entire country that voted for Owen Smith as leader against Corbyn. They've got the look of death about them to me, Colin.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I give you a wee phone, because I just can't.
I'm not even sure it's worth trying to save them. But I aim to be back in Glasgow pretty soon, Colin. So hook up with me, follow me on Twitter, and let's have a cup of tea together. Thanks for the call, my friend. Let's go to Manchester and talk to Jace. Jason, Manchester, welcome.
Hi, first-time caller here, George.
Welcome, mate.
And always great to follow you on Twitter and YouTube.
Thank you.
And I find you very educational.
Thank you, friend.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Just watching the news now, it looks like the United Nations has voted on a resolution to stop the Israeli settlements in Palestine, which is great news, isn't it?
Yeah, the Americans didn't veto it for the first time in Obama's 8 years. as president. In fact, there have been more American vetoes on that subject under Obama than under any other president.
Well, I find it a whole disgrace. I went to Palestine last year, and the things I saw, I would cry over for days. And I went because of you, really, George.
Oh, I
and I've
appreciate
got
that.
friends there as well. And I've got friends there as well.
I appreciate that.
But there was something I wanted to talk to you specifically about, to be honest with you, George. This might surprise you. I work for a large corporate company, and last year one of our speakers was a guy called Jeremy Paxton.
Oh, yes.
Had, numerous, set twos on TV, and I have enjoyed watching you on TV many, many times.
Yeah,
it's
a big YouTube hit. They teach it in journalism school now. That 2005 one.
Well, I asked Jeremy a question because obviously I listen to you a lot. And I do watch a lot of your clips, especially the one about the Hezbollah clip on Sky News, which was absolutely fantastic as well.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. That's got 50 million views, that one.
I watch it every week with my Arab friends, trust me. Anyway, so I asked Jeremy, I said, tell me, I've seen you a few times have a couple of set twos with George. Is it that bad, your relationship with him? And, what do you think of George? And he said, George Galloway is a man who cares about his people, who's one of the best politicians, and the whole audience, were really surprised. And George, you might come as a surprise, but he paid you an immense 2 or 3 massive compliments, and because he was asked about other people like Russell, the comedian guy, and a few others. And honestly, the praise he had for you about somebody who cares, who wants to do the right thing, did shock me. It was not the one who attacks you on the TV. Honestly.
Yeah. Well, I'm very touched to hear that, Jace. I'm a bit surprised.
I was.
But I'm very touched by it. Let me do my best to return the compliment in this sense. There is nobody who watches Newsnight now, and who used to watch Newsnight when Paxman was running it, who can consider that today's Newsnight could hold a candle to yesterday's. And Paxman was always very mean to me, but he was mean to everybody. He wasn't particularly singling me out for meanness. Andrew Neil's a bit in the same boat. He has had some very trenchant arguments with me on television, but he does that with everybody, even with people that he agrees with. And that's what a journalist, a broadcaster at the top of the tree should be, isn't it? They should give everybody a hard time. They should question everything. And I always found that Paxman did that. And there's no doubt that the BBC is immensely poorer without Paxman. I mean, it's so bland, and the people that have succeeded him so ineffectual, that frankly, Newsnight is just not worth watching now that Paxman is gone.
No, it isn't. But I just wanted to say.
Well, I'm really glad that you did. I had no idea, because I've never met him outside of a studio. I've never had as much as a cup of tea with him. So it's good to know. Jace, thanks for that. I really appreciate it, because I would never otherwise have known that. Now, here is an SMS. It says, why is there a lack of morality in democracy? MPs rather help one CEO than hundreds of homeless people. I lived in Beijing for 6 years as a student. People never mentioned voting, referendum, etc., but they got a free education, health care, work, and entered a middle-class society. Of course, there are human rights and pollution problems, etc., but people are far better off knowing that their government has their best interests at heart. Well, as a very famous Russian once put it, the one thing that is certain about British elections is who is going to lose them. And Mark says hundreds of thousands of people voted for Honey G, but I don't expect her to become Prime Minister. Well, Mark, you might just get a surprise. I understand that Honey G has just released a record today, and that she has plans to release an LP, as I used to call them, in the very near future. What could possibly be on it I have no idea. But hey, there's no accounting for taste. James says, re-media censure of JC and supporters. No one I know watches BBC ITN anymore, so their JC gagging won't work. I think that's an important point. There has never been a time, ever in Britain, when the so-called mainstream media had so few buyers, so few takers, and when people believed so little of what they see and read on that mainstream media. Ignorance is now a choice. Everyone has the ability on their telephone, never mind their computer, to find what's what and where it's really at. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, online and on DAB. Access all radios.
Talk Radio. Give it some lip. Talk Radio.
Coming up and on live stream is Roland Lee Gift, formerly frontman of the Fine Young Cannibals. He's no longer a cannibal, but he's still very fine and young. Don't miss it the next hour.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listener comrades of the world, unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
0344 499 1000. That's the number to call to join the great debate on this University of the Airwaves. You can also tweet me at George Galloway, at Talk Radio, and you have a good chance that your point of view will reach a very large audience indeed. It's been a fantastic show so far. It's just about to get better.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
We'll get you talking and listening and watching, because this part of the show is being live streamed, and no wonder. I'm joined in the studio by two fine young men, not cannibals any longer. Roland Lee Gift, who was the singer, frontman, songwriter of that band in the late 80s, early 90s. I was a devotee. And so you can imagine my surprise when, at the Camden Irish Centre, of all places, I happened upon Roland again. It was my very good luck. And I discovered that he was back on tour. And since then, he's been in London, in Birmingham, in Hull, and he'll tell us where else he's going. Now, along with Roland is his guitar player, although he's far from just being a guitar player. Dave Randall is a musician and activist who's toured the world, playing guitar with Faithless, Dido, Sinead O'Connor, and many others, and is the author of a forthcoming book that I cannot wait to read. Sound System. Dave Randall, The Political Power of Music. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We're privileged to have you here, and the listeners to hear you talk, and I'm glad to say, play and sing. And now that I know what you're going to sing, I know that they are in for a treat. Roland, tell us first, what's got you back on the road? Did you rediscover a taste for it, the roar of the grease paint, the smell of the crowd?
Kind of. I got asked to go on tour with Jules Holland as a guest singer. When he goes out, he usually has somebody. He has quite a mixed show, and he has a guest singer. And I was invited on. I think we started off with the summer tour, and then there was we continued it with the winter tour, and that was great because I didn't have to think about anything. I just, they provided the car with the driver. Very nice guy, Trevor Bailey, and I'd just turn up, do my 4 songs, and then that was my night done. So it was a nice way just to sort of get back into doing things, and it gave me the taste for doing it all again.
And now you're appearing on your own, back on stage with bigger crowds. What's the audience like? Is it people that, like me, that really dug you back then, or is it a new audience?
Well, there are some newer, younger people because their parents would play the Cannibals songs. Would have the album. So, and sometimes when I go to gigs, and there's younger people there, I'm surprised because they recognize me, but they say it's because their parents used to play they grew up listening to the music.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you've been playing you were at the Dome, weren't you, in London?
Yeah.
Hare and Hounds in Birmingham.
In Birmingham.
Was it well received?
Yeah, very well received. And the Welly in Hull. They're all places that have been home to me because I was born in Birmingham.
That's right.
And then I moved when I was 11 to Hull.
Yeah, because somebody said to me on Twitter the other day that you'd just played there and that they were very proud of you. I didn't know what she meant.
Yeah.
But that's because
yeah.
you're partly from there.
Yeah. I moved there when I was 11 and I left when I was 21. But I've still got friends and family there, and I go
Can't
back
imagine why you left Hull, mate.
To seek my fortune.
And now, Dave, how long have you been playing with Roland?
Well, I think it's about 4 years now, actually.
Is it?
I think 3 or 4 years, yeah. I was working with a bass player when I was touring with Sinead O'Connor, who Roland was friends with, and it was actually her, Yolanda, who got me involved with Roland's new band at the time, but I think that was as many as 4 years ago now. But the band's evolved over that time, and I think we've never sounded better. But there you go. I think it's been a good year this year in particular.
Well, unfortunately, the two women backing singers that I saw you with are on holiday. Unfortunately for us, not for them. They've gone to spend Christmas and New Year abroad, so they can't be with us. But what does the band consist of? You've got a keyboard, your guitar, a bass guitar.
Yeah, and a great drummer, Dave Barbarossa, on the drums, and the singers who you've met.
Debbie and Julie, yeah. We have, there's a guy called, his name's Guy Vivian, who plays, well, I got him in to play bass on a keyboard because a lot of the songs, the newer songs, have been written on a bass keyboard. The bass parts are written on a keyboard. So I tried that, but then he also is very adept at playing with doing the chords with his other hands.
Oh wow!
And in fact, he said that that's what he was known for when he first came to town, was that he could do bass parts with one hand and chords with the other.
I always wonder. You see, if I paid for a ticket, which I haven't yet, to come and hear you, I'd want you to be singing the stuff that I know and love.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that that's true for people of my age. But presumably that gets boring for you. And in any case, as a creative person, you're making new music. How do you balance the two in the gig?
Quite simply, really. We generally, I think the last gig that we did, we started off with 2 new ones, but then we played an old one, and then a new one, then an old one, then a new one, then an old one, and then towards the end, it's maybe the last 3-4 songs are new ones. But I like playing the old stuff as well, because they still feel meaningful. I mean, the song
definitely meaningful, yeah.
Song like "I'm Not the Man I Used to Be" has a lot more meaning now to me than it did when I wrote it.
Well, when I heard you do it the other day, it brought a tear to my eye. It's for a man, and for a man d'un certain âge, it's a very poignant song. But when you wrote that, you were a much younger man.
Yeah, I was probably 27 or something. I mean, but that's what I like about writing songs, is you don't know what's going to come.
Yeah, how does that work? I mean, do you sit down at a typewriter or at the kitchen table? Or does it come to you in your head when you're out walking or lying in bed?
Yeah, all different kinds of ways. I mean, I remember I wrote a song called "Say It Ain't So," and that's because I was watching. What was the guy that killed his wife? The
Have to be careful. We're not going to say something libelous.
No.
They were definitely
it's
found
not.
guilty, were they?
It's not. His name escapes me now, but he was the ex-football player.
Not the American.
Yeah.
O.J. Simpson.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And
He was cleared, of course. He's an innocent man.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Allegedly.
And I just remember watching somebody, there was a demonstration outside the courtroom, and somebody just had a sign saying, "Say it ain't so, Joe." And that just, I was just sitting there with my guitar. And that's where that...
And from that comes
just from that comes a song.
Music. Now, Dave, I'm sure Roland won't mind me saying, you seem to be younger than us. Were you into Roland's work back then?
I was a fan, and it's not the first time it's happened in my career, actually, because I suppose Sinead O'Connor is another example of somebody who I grew up admiring, seeing on MTV. I used to work in a guitar shop in Southend-on-Sea, and it was one of the only places in town with MTV, and I used to gaze up at those screens and see Sinead, and I would also see the Fine Young Cannibals, and I thought they were both absolutely fantastic. So I grew up as a fan of the band, and I think in a way that helps, actually, because I think I sort of understand what the fans want to hear. I sort of had that fan's perspective. I know what the key riffs, the key moments in those songs are, for me at least, and that seems to help.
Yeah, it does.
Now, you were at my meeting, so you have an interest in politics, Roland.
Yeah.
And you're teamed up with Dave, who has written a book about the political power of music. What do you think is the political power or potential in music?
I think it can be helpful to highlight things, and it's good to have a soundtrack to whatever it is.
Very good.
That you're doing. If it on its own, can it change things? I don't think so on its own.
It can be the soundtrack to something that can, though.
Yeah.
And we've had it, in the studio, this very studio, not that long ago, we had a fellow who's, you could call him a historian of rock against racism. I was a part of that as a political activist, not as a musician. And then I would argue that music and musicians, performers, played a really big role in actually marginalizing and more or less defeating what looked to be a very ugly fascist rise in Britain.
Yeah.
Were you influenced by that at all?
No, I used to do a lot of rock against racism gigs in Hull when I was living in Hull then. And I went on that march, the big march to Victoria Park.
I was there.
Oh yeah,
I was there. Fantastic event, and we talked about that actually with the author. But as I was canvassing with him, that came and went. It arose in a historical moment, a political moment. It was decisive, but politics has rather gone out of the music business since then, wouldn't you say?
I think it has. It was interesting because I went back. They had I think it was 30 years later.
Yeah.
They had the event again in Victoria Park.
Yeah.
And it was so corporatized. It was like people were streamed in through these barriers by the police, and you're in the field, and there were all these concessions around the field. I think that politics definitely has gone out of music. It's funny because I think a lot of the record companies that might have put political records out didn't do it for political reasons. They just did it because it was what was in fashion at the time, and they thought they could shift units by doing it.
Yes and no. I'm keen to respectfully disagree with some of this. I do agree that there's an incredible corporate stranglehold on most mainstream culture, and I think in a way that's best exemplified by the whole pop idol kind of phenomenon. Music presented as a competition, and that if you're a young artist you have to imitate the last big thing rather than find your own voice. But I do think there is exciting political music. I think it tends to be somewhat marginalised and on the underground, but even some of the biggest pop artists today do continue to grapple with big political issues. A good example being Beyonce's demonstration of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement when she performed Formation at the Super Bowl. And of course, Rudy Giuliani laid into her for that. He's now one of Donald Trump's right-hand men, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to the Rock Against Racism, I mean, I agree that was absolutely pivotal. But in a sense, I think that the left was slightly playing catch-up, and this is something that I think we need to think about culture more carefully, those of us who want to change the world. And they were playing catch-up in this sense, in the sense that actually, if you look at history, you see that rulers have long understood the political power of culture, actually since the beginnings of class society. But a few examples I go through in the book. The CIA used music during the Cold War as part of a number of covert campaigns. The Kremlin was very worried about the impact of certain musicians. Certain music was banned, including the Beatles. They were particularly worried about the Beatles. Music was an important component in the Arab revolutions, and so on. And I go into these and some other examples in the book. But so I do agree with you. On its own, music can't change the world. But I do think that music is one of the things that puts ideas in our minds, that gives us the values that we have. And I think it's a mistake, therefore, to think, as I suspect no one in this room does, but I do think it's a mistake to believe, as some people do, that politics only takes place in Parliament and on protests and picket lines. Actually, the drip effect of everyday culture is very important as well.
Well, that's absolutely correct, and none of us in this room do disagree with that. But let me just make this point, repeat this point, but refine it. We defeated the rise of the National Front and organised fascism on a mass scale. We have avoided. Other European countries have not been so lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, is it Pegida in Germany can turn out 100,000 people on a demonstration. I went on a counter demonstration to them in Newcastle, and they didn't have 200.
Yeah.
And though they were preying on the economic ills of the northeast of England, the people had far more sense than to follow them. But racism hasn't gone away.
Right.
The BNP and the National Front and organised fascist formations have been defeated, but the ideas on which they feed have definitely not gone away. There's hardly a day you don't see on YouTube or making it into the newspapers horrific, ugly outbursts of racism. And it's not just older people either. There's a new generation of people with racist ideas. Roland?
There are. I think that racism's always been there. Now we see it because everybody's got, not everybody, but I don't have one, but people have a smartphone. So you can see stuff that before you wouldn't see. And some people have, some people never come across racism, so they think it doesn't exist. So now a lot of people can see it actually happening and more aware of it.
And by the way, this is an uncomfortable truth. Some of the things you see is racism from black people against Muslim people, for example.
Yeah, I mean, there was something on TV I remember a few years ago, and it was either the BNP or what was left of the National Front, and they were talking to a West Indian guy in Wolverhampton who was a member, and he was a member because he had this little wall that kept getting kicked over by young kids, and nobody was doing anything about it. But he joined the National Front, and the local councillor helped do something about it. I mean, I remember as a kid, seeing a black skinhead with National Front little labels, little badges.
But I think it's interesting, isn't it? The parallels which exist between that time that you described, George, when Rock Against Racism was so badly needed, the end of the 70s, and now, because of course the background to this is austerity, It's an economy that's looking very shaky. And it seems to me that whenever the economy is shaky and people are feeling the pinch, those with lots of money, the mainstream political leaders and so on, the Tories and so on, will encourage you to blame your neighbour rather than the real source of the problems. And I think that's what's happening all over again. But yes, the target is different now. It's more Islamophobia that's stoked up and so on.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the way that people talk about Muslims now is the way that people used to talk about blacks, used to talk about Irish, used to talk about, whoever was the latest. So they're like the latest bogeyman.
They are. Yeah. I've got to take a break for some capitalist messages.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
It is the mother of all talk shows, certainly tonight. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can also tweet your thoughts on my conversation now with Roland Lee Gift, and Dave Randall, who are performing together and are in the process of producing a new live album based on the tour that they've been on. Roland, things have changed a lot, of course, but one of the gains of the period of Rock Against Racism was to bring black and white musicians together, the two-tone idea, of which you're a perfect example. But that didn't seem like it was necessarily easy to make happen at the time.
I think in England it wasn't such a big deal. To have a black person in a group with a white person wasn't such a big deal. But in America, it was. And when we first started, we didn't think that we'd get on MTV because they weren't playing black music. They didn't have any black faces. And it was only when they had Michael Jackson, and then they started to have more black people on MTV. And people thought that it was like, a big statement or something. If you go to America, they'd think you were making a big point. But it was just, in England, you tend to be in groups with people that you knew or knocked around with. And that person that you knew might be black or might be white, and that's why you were in a group together. It wasn't, necessarily because you were making a statement. It's just because you were friends.
Now, here's almost a philosophical question. It was once coined in a debate I was in more than 40 years ago. Is music neutral? I'll tell you why I ask it. Because when looking at the Rock Against Racism period, some of the people I most admired at the time, and indeed still admire their music, had some of the worst political views, at least for a time, and were one of the spurs to the growth of Rock Against Racism. The two obvious examples are Eric Clapton and David Bowie, both of whom expressed, in Bowie's case, later regretted, publicly regretted. In the other case, I'm sorry to say, of Eric Clapton, not really atoned for. But what do you do if you really like somebody's music but you hate their politics? You can't like a musician because of his politics. Should you dislike a musician because of his politics? I mean, I'll give you I'm the world's biggest Bob Dylan fan, and his politics were once very good and are now really very bad. Very, very bad. But I can't stop myself liking him and buying his stuff. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that, people change. And it's also, once a song is out, it has its own life. It doesn't even belong to the person who made it anymore, because you hear it and it's your song, because it means what it means to you. So I think it doesn't really matter. The song has its own life. The song came through that person delivered it to you, and they may have been, what you thought was a great guy at the time. But everybody can change.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact of what they did at that moment and what it does to you.
I think that's true. I think you have to separate the two. And actually, some of the sharpest political minds have said that. I think Trotsky said that art should be first and foremost about art. And And of course, this is an old dilemma. I mean, the same can be said of Wagner. The same can be said of Richard Strauss, who worked directly for the Third Reich. So I agree with Roland. I would simply add this, that I think that when it's artists who are around, who are on tour, who are on social media nowadays, have the debate. You know, say your music is great, but why have you got those misogynistic lyrics? Or why have you got those, you know, I think that's the way I would approach it.
Yeah. But I mean, it seems incredible to me. I mean, leave Bowie aside, it's a different case. But Clapton played with black musicians, he played black music, he was a blues guitar player. How could you, at the same time, hate black people and say that all black people should leave the country? Because that's what he said. And not just once, repeatedly.
I know. It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is. You'd have to...
I once wrote Clapton as God, God forgive me, on a wall. I mean, I as a guitar player, I think there has never been
I didn't know you were a guitar player, George.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
but,
sorry.
I mean, I believe that he, as a guitar... I was a double bass player.
Okay.
As a guitar player, I think that there has never been anyone better.
And it was deeply shocking for precisely those reasons to the people who set up Rock Against Racism, Red Saunders and Roger Huddle and the others. And I think that the fact that they did that was absolutely brilliant. And actually, it's extremely disappointing that Clapton didn't change his ways in exactly the way that Bowie did. But I think there's a bigger point here, isn't there? Which it seems to me that Clapton is an extreme example of a phenomenon that you see a lot, and that is that people love, in inverted commas, black culture, but they do nothing, many of them, to actually combat racism, institutional racism in society today. So there's a real contradiction there. We really love what you do in that particular box over there, but we're not actually interested in showing solidarity
what happens
for
to
your
you in
struggle.
your life.
Yes.
Well, look, a final break for capitalist messages, and then I want to ask you to play us a song.
Cool.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Well, I'm with Roland Lee Gift and his guitar player, Dave Randall, who has written a book called Sound System, The Political Power of Music. So he's a fine guitar player, but not just a guitar player. And Roland Lee Gift is a singer, and not just a singer. And here's my Christmas present to you, because it's their Christmas present to me, and I'm passing it on to you. What's it called, guys?
I'm Not the Man I Used to Be.
Whoa, thank God. What a beautiful song.
When I'm in trouble or out of step, if my balance has been upset, there's a feeling I can't accept. There's one thing helps me to forget. Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder why I'm drinking. But it's plain to see I'm not the man I used to be. If life were easy and didn't tease me or take things back, I could start to understand what makes me the man I am. Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder why I'm drinking.
but it's plain to see I'm not the man I used to be. Oh, no, no. It's a shame. I can't explain why I'm not the man I used to be. I've lost days that won't come back. Memories, they're fading fast. I should say the ones I have. What's the use? Most of them are bad. Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder why I'm drinking. But it's plain to see I'm not the man I used to be. No, no. And it's a shame. I can't explain why I'm not the man I used to be. Don't know my name. Do you know my name? Can you help me say why I'm not the man I used to be?
Fantastic. Roland Lee Gift and Dave Randall on guitar. Thank you very much for an exquisite rendition of a very, very beautiful song. Roland, what comes next? When's your next gig?
March, I think. They're the ones in the book.
Yeah.
And then these gigs that we did, we've recorded, so that'll be for a live album. That's the plan. Well, I haven't listened to anything yet, but hopefully we'll have captured something in these shows.
And any idea of the release time for that?
I could say around about April.
Okay.
I mean, it's a guess.
Will you come back in and we'll review it at the time?
Love to, yeah.
And Dave, when's your book out?
End of March, but it can be pre-ordered now if your listeners are interested.
Oh, there certainly will be. How do we do that?
I think it's on Big Bad Amazon at least. And it's published by Pluto Press. So visit either of those websites, and I think you can pre-order it now. You can certainly pre-order it through Amazon, and they should think of it as planting a bulb, some daffodils. They can do it tonight, have a Christmas sherry, forget that they've done it, and then they'll have a nice surprise in the early spring when it drops through the letterbox.
Fantastic. Sound System, The Political Power of Music by Dave Randall and the great Roland Lee Gift. I've got to tell you, Roland, you still are the man you used to be. And we're very, very privileged to have had you with us tonight. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway
on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Well, that seems to have gone down well, both on the Twitter and on the live stream at facebook.com/talkradiouk. Marie McFarlane says, Roland Gift's voice is so beautiful, live and no auto-tuning. A treat from a gifted artist. My thoughts entirely, Marie. And Asif says, Lee, Gift and Randall are sensational interviewees. They are so articulate. This mix of politics and music is simply great radio. This has got to be a regular feature on the mother of all talk shows. Good luck to the boys on tour. Best wishes, Asif. Thanks, Asif. And Manpreet Sambi says, do the right thing, Jeremy Corbyn, and rescind George Galloway's expulsion. Best Christmas present you could give. Thank you for that, friend. James says, media censure. Oh, no, I've already read that one. Let me take the next call, then. It's from the legendary Damien in Brighton. On you go, Damien.
Good evening, George.
Hi.
George, I'd like to put forward my theory of why the rebel MPs are persisting in their attempt to topple the leader of the Labour Party.
Yes.
I'd like to start off by taking head on the premise. So these people, Rebel MPs, are self-confessed centrists. Their argument is that you can only win a general election from the centre ground. Now, if there's one lesson that came out of Hillary Clinton's defeat...
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite. I rarely would agree with anything that Norman Tebbit says, George, but there's something that he's quite correct about, and that is that the centre ground is the killing fields of political parties. They're caught in a pincer movement. They're attacked, ambushed from both sides.
Exactly. You walk down the middle of the road, you get knocked down by the traffic coming both ways.
Exactly. Now, I think the fact that the establishment and its surrogates in the media, Conservatives and the right wing of the Labour Party, the fact that they've campaigned for over a year to try to topple Jeremy Corbyn rather gives the game away, George. What their message has been, it's been a very consistent message, and that is they have attempted to inculcate the public into believing that the Labour Party is unelectable under Mr Corbyn.
Yeah.
So let's turn that on its head. Let's have a look and let's review the performance of the Conservative Party against this so-called unelectable leader. So the Conservatives have been defeated in 4 by-elections on the bounce by Labour under Mr Corbyn.
That's right.
And the Labour Party's achieved increases of in their majorities of up.
Three out of 4 went up, and in 2 cases considerably.
Okay. The Conservatives have lost over 50 council seats and 5 councils, whilst Labour increased its share of the vote nationally by 4%. The Conservatives have lost every mayoral campaign, every mayoral election, including London. The Conservatives have a wafer-thin majority in Parliament. They have been defeated. They've had to carry out 22 U-turns in the last year, and they have arguably the worst leader that they have ever had in the party's history.
I agree, and they're divided.
And they're divided down the middle on the Europe question. Now, that's their record. So, in addition to that, obviously Mr Corbyn has tripled the membership. We're at 600,000. And in addition, this week, the Labour Party has narrowed the gap in the polls by 5%. That's correct, by 5%, by 5 points, in the polls. Now, if I were a Conservative, George, I would be very concerned indeed about the lengthy run of defeats at the hands of the Corbyn-led Labour opposition. Now, I'm sorry to go in the roundabout way, George, but I just wanted to have a look at what's happened this year, rather than what we're being told has happened. I just wanted to look at the facts. Now, I think that the attacks by the Labour MPs has also damaged the party's ability to communicate its message. And that message is just rattle through it, £10 an hour minimum wage, building 1 million new homes, creating an extra 1 million well-paid jobs by investing £250 billion in upgrading the UK's infrastructure, providing adequate resources to the NHS, increasing security of tenure for renters, and reintroducing free tuition and renationalising the railways. Now, that is the best. People should be very clear on this, that is the best offer that the public and the voters of this country are going to get in their in a generation. There's never going to be an offer as good as that, and it's exactly what the country needs. It's aligning the interests of the public with the economy, which is a very novel concept. So, getting to my theory, George, here's the theory. When you take all those factors into account, I would argue that Mr Corbyn is eminently electable, and I believe that the Rebel MPs have come to exactly the same conclusion. That's why they tried to topple him. Now, they failed in that because they were blocked by the membership. So now they've changed their objective. And I honestly believe, George, they are now actively engaged in a campaign to cause the electoral defeat of the Labour Party.
I agree with that. I agree with that absolutely, Damien. That theory is right on the button. I absolutely agree with that. Thanks very much for the call, my friend.
Thank you.
Craig in Manchester wants to take issue with my comments on Clapton, so we better hear him. On you go, Craig.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Hi. I'm not denying that Eric Clapton said all those things from the stage in Birmingham.
Not just Birmingham. He did it over 11 nights.
Yeah. I'm not denying that he said that, but I wouldn't say he was a racist.
He just wanted all the black people to be kicked out of the country.
Yeah, but when he said them things, yeah, he was bang out of order, and he was also in the grips of a long-standing alcohol problem.
No, I think that's a fair point. But why has he not taken? He's long been short of that problem. So why has he not atoned for that in the way that Bowie did?
Well, how do you? I mean, if you look at, he's always been identified with the black community. A lot of his best friends were black people. I mean, if you watch the video on YouTube when B.B. King died that he did, he was really broken-hearted.
He was, and it was a great album he did with B.B. King. Look, I love Clapton, Craig.
I know you do, yeah.
I love him. It breaks my heart that he has never said in all these decades since, listen, I was bang out of order in your views. I should never have said those things. I didn't believe them. I certainly don't believe them now. I'm ashamed of them. Then people could forgive that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I wouldn't. I mean, if you look at the drug rehabilitation centre that he set up in Antigua, Crossroads, he has given away his possessions. He sold lots of guitars. He's done benefit concerts for it.
That's true.
And that was set up there to get local people,
black people,
sober, and to remain sober. Now, I wouldn't think that if someone had really deep-rooted racial hatred in their heart, would do anything like that.
No, I think that's a very good point. And in a way, that action is an atonement, is an act of atonement. But he could have put long ago this whole thing to bed by saying, "I should never have said those things."
Yeah, I don't think he's a racist. Yeah.
Well, he either was then, or drink did something completely phenomenal to him. It made a guy who was the greatest blues guitar player, who had black friends, and who played black people's music, say that all black people should be kicked out of England.
Yeah. And I agree with you totally that, I mean, he was bang out of order to say that. And he probably does regret it, and he should.
He should say so.
Over the last 40 years, he should have apologised.
Exactly. That's the point. Craig, thanks. I've got to press on, mate, because of the hour. But thanks for making those points. Jason is on the line all the way in Japan. Go ahead, Jason.
How are you doing? Okay.
I'm good, thank you very much.
Oh, if I'd like to say Happy Christmas to you and your staff and everybody else.
Thank you.
And, well, I mean, I'm a Buddhist, so it doesn't make any difference. But
Merry Christmas to you anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'll just tell you a little bit of a factoid. In Japan, then we celebrate, we don't have turkey. We eat pizza.
Okay.
That's how ridiculous it is. And on Christmas Eve, Japanese people think Christmas Eve is Christmas Day. Wow. And another little bit was about my father, God bless him and keep him. Then people don't know how good they've got it these days. Then in World War II, his Christmas present was a tangerine and a boiled egg.
Well, when I was very young, your Christmas stocking was a half-crown, which is 12.5 pence. It was a silver coin, an apple and an orange, and a selection box. That was your Christmas stocking when I was a kid. Oh, we've lost the line in Japan. Jason.
I'm still here.
Okay, go on.
Hello?
Yes, go on.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Go on.
Anyway, the subject was about if you wouldn't mind awfully, a couple of plugs.
Yeah, go on.
And it was just about the homeless in England, basically. And, well, throughout the world, if you wish, but it's close to my heart being an ex-serviceman, the homeless veterans, etc.
Of whom there are many. Unbelievably, there are many.
Yes. Well, thanks to phony Blair. Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, I've got a book I want to send you. It's an e-book. It's on Amazon's Kindle.
Okay.
If I can get through to your stuff after this.
Okay.
It's under the name Jason Bruce. It's called Street Justice. And what it is, it's basically 30 criminals, white-collar criminals, are trained by 3 homeless people how to live as homeless people to avoid going to prison for 30 years. So it's not for the faint of heart.
No, definitely not. Well, I look forward, Jason, to receiving it. I need to press on because I need to fit in a woman caller. Katie is on the line. Go ahead, Katie.
Hello.
Hi there.
Oh, finally. Thank you, George.
Nice to
I'm
talk to you.
first-time caller, yes. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having the politics and music online.
Wasn't it a fantastic gig? I mean, it was
wonderful.
just beautiful. Roland's voice
Roland
is
and Dave,
just
yes.
amazing, and Dave's a great
Definitely.
guitar player.
Definitely, and I think more of that actually, because I think, I follow music and politics, like my 2 favourite loves, and I'm particularly old-fashioned. I guess I don't know if you call it old-fashioned. I love Pink Floyd, for example, and they're very political.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm very political, yes.
And also, it's interesting because I'm a lifelong, but not that old, but a Labour supporter and member, and it was interesting as well because Kate Bush, she came out with this whole.
Wasn't she backing Theresa May?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, she said that I think she's just more of a feminist, and she lives, she's a lifelong kind of hermit, if you will. I don't think she understands. Like, she wasn't trying to say, yes, I'm a Tory or anything, but I don't know. It was just a backlash that she got online, and I just felt the need to stand up for her because, as your guest was saying, like, music is a gift, and sometimes people's political persuasion is not really a reason to kind of be hateful towards them.
No,
and that brings me to you, because I feel that you've had such a bad rap from people. I remember watching Question Time was it 2015, when you weren't even allowed to speak. I think that's the time when you got the real hatchet job.
Oh, that was in North London, yes. That was a setup, Katie.
It was, exactly, and I saw it for what it was.
But it backfired, you see. When you try to shout someone down and stop them from speaking, the public's instinctive reaction is to be with you. Listen, Katie, you're the last caller before Christmas, and I'm really grateful to you for being so. Unfortunately, I've got to go now, but I will be back. I will be back next Friday, God willing, for the pre-New Year show. And I had to choose a Christmas song, and what could I choose but this? I knew Kirsty MacColl well. God rest her soul and protect her little children that she left behind. This is the Pogues and Kirsty MacColl.